Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for our webinar, 10 Early Signs of Alzheimer's. My name is Kelly Blount, and I'm the Program Marketing Specialist here at General Electric Credit Union. We're so glad you've joined us as we have a lot of great content ahead, and we wanted to thank you all for tuning in from the comfort of wherever you're joining us from today. Before we get started, please note this meeting is being recorded. By attending this webinar, your attendance is agreement to being included in our recorded session. Before we get started, I like to start with a couple housekeeping items. If you've joined us before, you may remember the rundown, but if you're new to our webinars, welcome. As we all know, technology can sometimes be finicky, so if we run into any issues, please bear with us and keep in mind, we are recording today's webinar to share with you afterwards. So with that, let's get into it. To reduce background noise, all attendees are automatically muted upon joining. If you have any questions throughout the duration of the presentation, you can submit those questions using the questions feature in your attendee panel. If you're on a computer or smartphone, there's a drop-down located in the lower right corner. For the sake of time, we may not be able to answer every question, but we will reach out to you after to ensure your question is answered should we not be able to get to it in our time today. Additionally, after today's webinar, you will receive a pop-up that takes you to a survey. Your feedback is very important to us as we continue to expand our webinar program, so please take a moment to provide us feedback on how things went and what you'd like to see for next time. As I mentioned, this webinar is being recorded and will be shared to our events page in the coming weeks. You'll be able to view this webinar as well as previous webinars on demand on our events page. And with that, I'd like to turn things over to Kelsey Nihiser, Program Manager with the Alzheimers Association Greater Cincinnati Chapter, to introduce herself and take us through today's topic.
Thanks, Kelly. So good afternoon, everyone. I know we just made the switch over to afternoon, so I'm so excited to be here with you today and to get to talk to you. So today we're going to be talking about the 10 warning signs of Alzheimer's and dementia. So just to go over some of the topics that we'll cover today, we're really going to talk about that description of typical age-related memory, thinking, or behavioral changes, things that are common and natural to happen over time as we age. You know, we often hear people say, well, I've been noticing some different things about my memory or my mom's memory, my loved one's memory. Is that okay? So we're going to discuss that difference between normal age-related changes and things that you want to talk to your doctor about. We're also going to recognize some of the common warning signs of Alzheimer's and dementia. We are going to discuss the tips for approaching someone about memory concerns that you might notice within them. And then we're going to really talk about the importance of early detection and the benefits of early diagnosis. So we've heard people say before, you know, well, what's the point if I'm going to get it anyway? It's in my family, you know, whatever happens, happens. But what we really want to highlight today is to talk about some of the benefits that can come about in terms of treatment and care planning that really show that the earlier we know, the better. And then lastly, we're going to finish up with naming some of the resources available through the Alzheimers Association. So as Kelly mentioned, I am a program manager with the Greater Cincinnati chapter. And just to kind of highlight quickly, Greater Cincinnati, we like to say it's great because we cover 19 counties total between Greater Cincinnati in Ohio, as well as 9 counties in northern Kentucky and another 5 in southeast Indiana. So we love to share out resources and free education and support systems for people in our area regarding, you know, aging well, brain health, and then topics around Alzheimer's and dementia. So I've mentioned the two terms, Alzheimer's and dementia. So Kelly, if you'll take us to our next slide, I'm really going to talk about what is that difference between dementia and Alzheimer's, because we hear them said often interchangeably, and I really want to make sure that we understand what that difference is. So it's common to experience some issues with memory, thinking, and behavior as we age. But however, changes that interfere with daily life could be a sign of something more serious, such as dementia. So what is dementia? And when we think about this, we often like to show this visual of this umbrella. And I think every time I say that, I do this with my hands, because we really talk about it as an umbrella term. It describes a group of symptoms related to cognitive decline. So symptoms of dementia include difficulties with memory, language, problem solving, or other cognitive skills that affect a person's ability to perform everyday activities. So when we think about cognitive decline, we look at cognition in what we think of as different cognitive domains. And different domains are things like where our memories are stored, where language takes place, where our problem solving, executive functioning, where all of these things happen in our brain. Those are in different cognitive domains. And when we're talking about cognitive decline, we're really talking about how those different domains are impacted. And when it's happening in 2 or more cognitive domains, that's when we're talking about a major cognitive disorder, something like dementia or Alzheimer's. And it means that it's affecting someone's ability to perform those everyday activities in their life. Alzheimer's disease is the most common form of dementia and the one that we hear about the most. So when we think about dementia as that umbrella term, Alzheimer's disease is the most common form of dementia. So it impacts 5.8 million Americans. Currently, we have about 5.8 million Americans living with Alzheimer's today. About 97% are over the age of 65, but I did want to note that about 200,000 Americans younger than 65 are living with what we call younger onset Alzheimer's. So people can develop the disease in their 40s. And other causes of dementia include, you'll see the next 3 common forms of dementia that are listed here. There's vascular dementia. So this used to be called post-stroke dementia, or even hardening of the arteries. So this one can occur in people who have had mini strokes. And some estimates say that about as many as 50% of people with Alzheimer's also show signs of mini strokes. So right now with the research that we're seeing, it's very common that people might have forms of mixed dementia. So they might, have vascular dementia and then also develop Alzheimer's disease. When we look at dementia with Lewy bodies, this is something that has symptoms that are similar to Alzheimer's disease or some of the same symptoms. However, some of those early symptoms can include things like sleep disturbances, visual impairments, visual hallucinations, gait problems, and then also Parkinsonian movement features. So those ones are a little more specific to Lewy body dementia. And then the last one that you'll see here on the screen is frontotemporal dementia. So unlike Alzheimer's, memory is typically not impacted first, but we do see typical early symptoms with frontotemporal include marked changes in personality and behavior, and difficulty with producing or comprehending language. So that's a little bit of a difference with that type of dementia. And then I did want to note too, and I mentioned we're going to talk a little bit more about that early detection and early diagnosis. There are conditions like Parkinson's disease that can cause dementia. There are also some situations that are reversible, things like hormone or vitamin deficiencies or even urinary tract infections can have the same symptoms or similar symptoms that appear like dementia, and those are things that can be resolved. So this is why we really talk about that early detection, knowing those warning signs, and talking to a doctor early can really help. So we'll touch on that early diagnosis piece a little bit later in the presentation. And then on this next slide, I just want to note a few more items about Alzheimer's disease specifically. So I know that when I was growing up, we talked a lot about, people in my family that were senile. I think was the language is continuing to change over time, or we associate Alzheimer's disease with old age. So I do want to note that Alzheimer's disease is not a normal part of aging. It is the most common form of dementia, but it is not a normal part of the aging process. So it is a progressive brain disease, meaning it will get worse over time. It causes nerve cells to die, and then this causes the brain to lose tissue. Sometimes that process is called shrinkage. So this also causes loss of function and communication between brain cells. So those neurons die out, plaque builds up between them, and then the communication between those nerve cells or neurons is unable to take place. And those changes can cause the symptoms of Alzheimer's disease. So these symptoms include things like memory loss, problems with thinking and planning, behavioral issues, and then in the later stages, it even causes trouble with swallowing. So because the disease affects people in different ways, the rate of progression and the experience with symptoms can vary as well. So we do not see a difference in symptoms between men and women necessarily, but we do see in the statistics that women have a higher risk of Alzheimer's. They're still doing a lot of research around why that is, but a piece of it is definitely that statistically women are living longer. So we do know that age is the greatest known risk factor for Alzheimer's disease. Other risk factors include things like family history, genetics, having a parent or sibling with Alzheimer's, but it is part of what we usually refer to as a pretty complex constellation of modifiable factors and non-modifiable factors. So non-modifiable being things like our genetics, our family history, our age, our sex, our race, and some of those modifiable factors are things like our lifestyle and behavioral decisions and habits. So things like our sleep, our stress management, our cognitive activities, our social engagement, and especially our physical activity. So that's something we talk a lot about in some of our other education programs too. So going to the next slide, we are going to start getting into the 10 warning signs of Alzheimer's, or those 10 early signs of kind of what to look out for. So it's really important to know what the warning signs are and to be on the lookout for some of these marked changes. So through the Alzheimers Association, we've developed this list of 10 warning signs, and this is meant to help people understand that difference between, normal, I'll say normal in quotes because it's a little different for everyone, but that typical age-related change, that normal aging, and then those common signs of a possible dementia. So when you see these signs in yourself or a loved one, it's really important to see a doctor. You'll hear me say that again and again, but it's really important to know what you're dealing with and can get connected to the best treatment. So the list that you see here is meant to be a tool to help identify unusual changes in a person's memory, in their thinking, or in their behavior. It's also important to note that this list does not in any way constitute a diagnosis of Alzheimer's or dementia. I promise you will not leave the program here today with any type of diagnosis. These are really simply meant to be the most common examples of changes that are experienced, and individuals may experience one or more of these signs in different degrees, so it won't, again, be the same for anybody. They may also only experience a few of these warning signs, so they might not all be present in each individual, but I would say if there are warning signs that you're noticing in yourself or a loved one, that talking to a doctor and working towards that diagnosis is extremely beneficial. So we're going to talk through each of these in detail, and I'm going to give specific examples as we go of the warning sign, as well as some examples of those typical age-related changes that relate to each of these warning signs. So going to the next slide, we're going to be talking about number one is memory loss that disrupts daily life. So one of the most common signs of Alzheimer's, especially early on, is forgetting recently learned information like names. So we know that while Alzheimer's disease impacts people differently each time, most commonly it impacts your short-term memory. So we know that what we're seeing in people is that their long-term memories are not as impacted as their short-term. So they might have a hard time processing new information or recalling information that they just learned. So other things include things like forgetting important dates or events, repeatedly asking the same questions, or maybe repeating the same information over and over again, forgetting that they may have already told you or already asked you that question or that statement. And then also increasingly relying on memory aids or leaning on others for things or tasks that they used to be able to handle on their own. So when you're thinking about these warning signs, you really want to be looking at, what is typical according to that person. So if you're noticing things that, maybe your mom used to be able to do on her own, that now she's relying on someone else in order to remember, or some type of memory aid, maybe there are sticky notes all over the house to help remember things, that might be a warning sign for that person's kind of baseline typical behavior. When we look at kind of the typical age-related change that relates to this warning sign, this is something that people ask me all the time when I'm at, especially like community events out in the public, forgetting information and then remembering it later. So oftentimes, someone will say, I parked my car in the Kroger parking lot and then I got out of Kroger and I couldn't find it. Is that okay? Is that a problem? And, we say, well, we're not standing in the Kroger parking lot right now. So you found your car, you were able to retrace your steps or to think back to some kind of cue that reminded you of where that car was, or you remembered it later. You remembered being close to that, cart corral or that trash can, and you were able to kind of retrace your steps. So the fact that you were able to remember it later, that is a sign that it's a typical age-related change compared to something that could be more a sign of potential dementia. So when we go to our next slide, that number 2 warning sign, here we're talking about challenges in planning or solving problems. So some people may experience new difficulties in their executive functioning. So that's, including developing or following a plan or having difficulty concentrating. A good example of this might be trouble following a family recipe that they've known for years. It could be something that, it's grandma's pumpkin pie and they make it every year for Thanksgiving and they've made it so many times they don't even need the recipe. Kind of noticing that recipe is no longer able to be referenced in their mind and they're having a harder time following that recipe. Another idea might be getting a notice from an electric company about their utilities being shut off. So that one, if it's happening often or happening with more than one bill, that's probably a sign of a deeper issue. Of course, thinking about a typical age-related change version of this, it's normal and natural to make occasional errors when managing bills or managing those household finances. Every now and then it's completely normal that you might forget a bill or miss a deadline. But if it's happening often and it leads to that level of, getting a notification that something's going to be shut off, that might be a sign of a deeper issue at hand. So moving forward in our slides to our third warning sign, here we're talking about people having difficulty completing familiar tasks. So people living with dementia often find it hard to complete daily tasks that used to be managed with, ease. Things here that we're thinking about are, driving to a familiar place or writing a grocery list or remembering how to play a favorite game. Those rules might not be easy to remember anymore. Not being able to organize that grocery list, not being able to, remember how they get to the park that they, took the dog every week. Those are things that might be signs of dementia or a deeper issue. And thinking about the typical age-related change here would be, occasionally needing help with, how to use a microwave or remote. When you think about having a new piece of technology in your house, or maybe an upgraded version of that microwave, or getting the new TV remote to be programmed properly, it's natural and typical that someone might need help with a new technology. If it's something that they haven't had that regular opportunity to engage with frequently, and it's something new, that's pretty typical that it might be something that they would need some assistance with. Maybe a younger relative or neighbor or family friend would be helping with that. So when we look at our fourth warning sign here, confusion with time or place. So when we think about an individual living with Alzheimer's or another dementia, they might commonly lose track of dates, seasons, or even just the passage of time in general. So they may have trouble understanding something if it's not currently happening, because passage of time is more of a challenge. If it's not currently happening, or if it's something that they're going to be doing in the future, or even, remembering how or where they got to a specific place, that can cause some confusion. So this can become more dramatic or profound in the middle and later stages, but in those earlier stages of Alzheimer's, it might be someone who, calls you in the middle of the night about their upcoming appointment. So if you tell someone, your doctor's appointment is coming up, Thursday afternoon, and it's Monday night, that might be a sign that, if they're confused or losing track of that date for that appointment, that might be something where there is a potential sign of dementia. When we think about the typical age-related change related to this warning sign, people could be getting confused about what day it is or when a scheduled appointment is taking place. And then again, the real key indicator here for that typical age-related change is that piece where you figure it out later. So, I do this all the time. I know every year when we hit the new year in January, I mix, it takes me probably a month to remember to write that new year after January 1st, or mixing up your days of the week. Yesterday felt like Tuesday, and so it might lead me to think that today is Wednesday. And then I have to remember, no, Kelsey, today is Tuesday. Those kinds of things are pretty common and typical in thinking about age-related change. So next up, looking at our fifth warning sign, here we're really focusing on trouble understanding visual images and spatial relationships. So these are some of the things that are possible signs of dementia. So some individuals with Alzheimer's or another dementia may experience vision problems. Vision problems can lead to difficulty with balance, trouble reading, and problems judging distance and determining color and contrast. And the big, concern here obviously is how this can really impact driving or navigating the environment around them. So this can become a serious safety issue. So Alzheimer's can cause issues just beyond memory or, thinking someone's, forgetting. It can really seriously impact the way someone moves or drives. Over time with Alzheimer's disease, peripheral vision deteriorates. So they can have some really serious, significant issues with depth perception. So again, this makes driving a huge issue. They might, stop for a stop sign, 20 feet back or 20 feet too forward because their depth perception is off due to that difference, and their peripheral vision is deteriorating as well. Something to keep in mind too in the vision piece of communicating or connecting with someone with Alzheimer's or dementia, that because they don't have that peripheral vision, you want to be really careful to not sneak up on someone and scare them. We actually lead an education program specific to effective communication strategies, and we cover this in detail, but basically you want to always approach someone who's living with dementia directly from the front and slowly, so they can see you and not be startled when you kind of pop around the corner and they didn't know that you were there. So that could be really confusing and disorienting and even scary for them. So when we think about typical age-related change in regards to this warning sign, vision changes such as cataracts, those are more typical in age-related change. So this sign shows us that these changes are not just about memory. That's the main thing I really want to highlight here. It's important here to think about all of the other ways that someone's daily life may be impacted by any of these changes. And this warning sign here really helps to highlight that safety concern in terms of physical movement or even driving in a vehicle. So when we look at our 6th warning sign here, we're going to be talking about new problems with words in speaking or writing. So individuals may have trouble following or joining a conversation. People who are struggling with potential Alzheimer's or dementia might stop in the middle of a conversation and then forget what they were talking about. They might also, like we mentioned in an earlier warning sign, continuously repeat themselves and not, remember kind of already sharing that statement with you. They might also struggle with finding the right word or calling things by the wrong name. So they might start using more descriptive terms to talk about something rather than the specific name of the actual item. So you might find someone calling everything, that thing, because it kind of takes that pressure off of them having to find that word. Or you might see someone saying, that floppy thing with the hole that water squirts out of, that's the water hose. They might just have a harder time, especially over time, finding those words. And again, when we think about a typical age-related change, and I've been doing this over the last couple of days, you can occasionally have trouble finding the right words. So you might say, oh, it's that thing that's connected to the thing, and you're like, oh, the outlet or the, extension cord. I know I do this most mornings when I've had, just one cup of coffee. It's normal that as we age, we might occasionally have trouble finding the right word. But again, that piece that kind of makes it different is that it comes back to you. The other night I was trying to remember the name of a specific plant in my house, and I think 2 hours went by, and all of a sudden I was saying imperial philodendron, and everyone was like, what are you talking about? But just sometimes you can be on a little bit of a delay or have a little bit of trouble finding the right word, and it comes back to you. So that would be more of that typical age-related change there. So looking at our warning sign number 7, this is where we're talking about misplacing things and losing the ability to retrace steps. So kind of like what we were talking about earlier with the Kroger parking lot. So this sign here often causes concern in people. So I want to clarify here that this is not just about, losing your keys on occasion, because I know we all do that. We had to tear apart our house. My partner lost his wallet, and we were looking in the weirdest locations, I don't think the wallet's going to be in the freezer, but we looked there anyway. So what we're talking about here is not, misplacing things from time to time. In that kind of situation, we can retrace our steps and find them, and that is that normal age-related change. But here we're really thinking about a person with Alzheimer's disease may lose things and not be able to recall, when it was last seen or identify the location where it was placed. He or she may put things in unusual places, such as putting shoes in the refrigerator. So it might be something where there's a disconnect in where things are normally stored and where they might be placed. And here that's due to, we're seeing a lack of executive function and awareness. That person may also grow increasingly suspicious of others. And they might also start accusing others of stealing or taking something that they shouldn't have. And this can occur, more frequently over time as someone gets further into the stages of Alzheimer's. Something I didn't highlight when we started today was just to make sure we all know, when we talk about the stages of Alzheimer's, through the Alzheimers Association, we're really talking about those common signs and symptoms within the early stages, the middle stages, and then the late stages of the disease. So here we're talking about how people can misplace things and lose that ability to retrace steps, and how it can have a greater impact as they progress within the disease. So next slide, we're looking at our 8th warning sign. So this one is really focusing on the impact of decreased or poor judgment. So individuals who are living with Alzheimer's or dementia may experience changes in judgment or decision making. So using poor judgment with dealing with money or paying less attention to hygiene and grooming. So, you know, maybe they used to go to the salon and get their hair done every week, and now they don't brush their hair at all. So this might be something especially common in individuals who live alone. But it's definitely a warning sign that, you know, you might see someone paying less attention to their grooming or to keeping themselves clean or bathing regularly because they're losing that that typical judgment that they may have had before. And again, here you really want to think about the person and their typical habits that you knew from before, or what would be normal for them, and how you're seeing a difference. So, you know, my grandmother went to the beauty parlor once a week to get her hair done, and if she stopped even combing her hair, stopped going to those appointments, that would definitely be a sign that there might be a decrease in that judgment because she's losing that habit. So again, when we're thinking about a typical age-related change related to this, you know, making a bad decision once in a while, forgetting to get your oil changed. I know Honda called me last week reminding me to get my oil changed. That's pretty typical in terms of thinking about aging. But again, if it's something that you're seeing happen more over time, that could be a sign of a larger issue. And we do often see this related to either kind of hygiene and especially changes in kind of judgment around financial decisions. So next slide, looking at warning sign number 9. Here we're talking about withdrawal from work or other social activities. So, you know, as we age, it's normal to feel uninterested, maybe by our family gatherings or by social engagements at times. Sometimes it's easy too, as we age, to get kind of in a groove or a comfort zone with what we like doing and what we don't like doing, and it might mean we get to make more choices on what we prefer to do. But when we think about someone who is experiencing dementia-related changes, we're talking about how they might start to lose their ability to hold a conversation or follow a conversation. And that might mean that as a result, they start to withdraw from social encounters or hobbies that put them in those situations that make them uncomfortable. They might lose the confidence to engage in that way socially, and they might also just find it too overwhelming. So we might start to see someone withdraw and make decisions to not even put themselves in a situation that would be uncomfortable or stressful for them. So again, when we think about the typical age-related change of this warning sign, you know, it's normal, it's natural to feel uninterested in family or social engagements at times. We might find ourselves being tempted or wanting to skip doing certain things, and that's normal. But we're really looking at more of that significant withdrawal from activities that we once really enjoyed doing. That could be a sign of a larger issue. So our final warning sign on the next slide is changes in mood and personality. So here, I mean, all of these are kind of related and kind of can intersperse between each other and kind of bleed over from one warning sign to another, and some of them are definitely related. Here we're really talking about changes in mood and personality. So individuals with Alzheimer's or another dementia can become confused. We mentioned this before, suspicious, depressed. They can be fearful or anxious. You think about the things that are happening, you know, with their brain, but also we mentioned the vision issues that can take workplace. So all of these things together can lead someone to getting easily upset, either at home or especially when they're out in public or at some type of social engagement. Maybe they're out of their comfort zone. Maybe it's at a new restaurant and they're having, a trouble reading or understanding the menu or communicating what they need. So in this situation, put yourself in their shoes. Their brain is working really hard to try to keep up with everything that's going on in their day, even when it's at times incredibly confusing and overwhelming. And so they're frustrated, and that can definitely lead to significant changes in the way that you're seeing their mood and their personality. So someone with Alzheimer's or dementia may become fearful, angry, or easily frustrated. And that's something that should be addressed because, again, what we're talking about here are potential signs of Alzheimer's disease or dementia, but it could also be signs of other physical issues that can be addressed with a conversation with their doctor. As we age, looking again at that typical age-related change, it's normal to develop very specific ways of doing things and becoming upset or irritable when our routine is disrupted. I know that I have a very specific set of things I like to do every morning with my coffee, my exercise, walking my dog, and I get frustrated when I can't complete my full routine, and it can maybe make me more irritable during my work day if I don't get to do that routine. So that's a more typical age-related change that we can experience. We get a little set in our ways. We find what we like to do and what we enjoy doing, and we don't like having our routine disrupted. So that would be more of a kind of a typical version of that. So just to recap on the next slide, looking at all of these warning signs again together, what I really want to highlight is if you notice one or more signs of these that we listed, either in yourself or in another person, it can be really difficult to know what to do. So it's completely natural if you feel uncertain or nervous about discussing any of these changes with another person. Sometimes voicing our worries about our health out loud can make them seem real, so denial or just kind of avoidance can be an easy way to just not have to really face any of it. Or, if you're concerned about bringing this up with a loved one, you might be fearful that you're going to upset someone by sharing what you're observing. It might, make them defensive. If you're bringing up things that you've noticed about, how their abilities or their behaviors are changing. However, when we look at these 10 warning signs, these are significant health concerns that we want to make sure are evaluated by a doctor. So it's really important that we take action to figure out what's going on. So our signs that we have here, the other thing to keep in mind in thinking about this and kind of what to do next. We do know too that these might not be noticeable every single day. Our memory can be variable. We can have really good days. We can have bad days. Some people might have more trouble with their language or navigating while driving. So they might have challenges certain days that they wouldn't be facing another day. So the important thing to determine is what has changed from that person's normal functioning. What has changed from that usual pattern of functioning that we see in that person on average. So they don't have to check all the boxes. And again, when we're just thinking about these being really significant health concerns, the earlier we know, the better, the more, different options we'll have in terms of treatment or discussions and planning will be available. So just keep that in mind too. They don't have to check all the boxes, but we do want to make sure that we are keeping an eye and getting connected to some help and having these evaluated by a doctor so that we can figure out what's going on. So on this next slide, I just wanted to kind of recap everything that we just covered, because I know I ran through 10 different signs pretty quickly. And as we mentioned at the beginning, this can look different in everybody. So again, these 10 warning signs are meant to be a useful tool. They're meant to help identify unusual changes in a person's memory, and a person's thinking and their behavior. So it's really important to note that this list does not constitute any type of diagnosis of Alzheimer's or dementia. So I hope I didn't stress anyone out in thinking like, do I have these, or how many, or I've noticed this in someone I love. You would definitely need to see a doctor to be able to get that diagnosis. So these are, what I've shared today are kind of just our most common examples of changes that are experienced. So again, individuals may experience one or more of these signs in different degrees or in different ways. And there are some reversible health issues that could cause some of these signs. So again, it's really important to see your doctor once you notice these in yourself or in someone else. So again, Alzheimer's disease is a slow progression. This is something we hear from families in our support groups. You know, they'll notice sudden changes, behavioral issues, something that changes overnight. So I tell you that Alzheimer's disease is a slow progression. On average, it takes about 8 to 10 years to really progress through the stages of this disease. So when you're observing something really sudden, it feels like it's overnight, or maybe it is overnight in terms of someone's behavioral issues. Something that abrupt is not Alzheimer's disease. That is likely something else. It could be something like pneumonia or a vitamin deficiency. It's really common. It's something we see often. Someone might have a urinary tract infection. So friends and family are often the first people to notice changes because you're witnessing them in someone else, or if you notice signs in yourself, again, it's important to see a doctor. But if we see these signs and we notice these changes in somebody else, we usually talk about 10 kind of tips for how to approach this and what to do. So it's a little easy to remember. There are 10 warning signs, and then we're talking about 10 different things to consider in terms of what to do if you do notice these changes in somebody. So first up, I would say assess the situation. So what changes are you noticing? Maybe even write them down. What changes are you seeing in their memory? What changes are you seeing in their thinking or their behavior? And then think about what else might be going on. Do they have other medical issues that could be causing problems? Do they have a history of diabetes or issues with their thyroid? Have they been taking antibiotics? Could they have, medications that are having a bad reaction? So make sure you think about, what you're noticing in the context of what else could be going on. And then really learn about the signs and the benefits of early diagnosis. So we're going to talk through those a little bit on the next slide in just a moment, just so we can talk through all the highlights of what an early diagnosis can help with. Also consider, has anyone else noticed changes? So if you are someone that lives in the household with the person you're concerned about, maybe they have a colleague at work who could have noticed something, or maybe they spend a lot of time, they go to breakfast or golf every morning with their neighbor, their best friend. Has that neighbor noticed something as well? And then think about how you would have the conversation with this person you're concerned about. Who should have that conversation to discuss those concerns? Would it be better received from you, or maybe, do they listen really well to their daughter, or does it need to be their doctor? Think about who would be able to relay some of these concerns in a way that they'll be able to hear with, hopefully getting the least amount of upset as possible. And then think about, what is the best time and place to have the conversation? When is that person at their best? Are they really, spry and alert and, in a better mood in the morning? Or Are they more of an afternoon person, you know, after they've had lunch or had their time waking up? So think about when that person's at their best. Again, you want to be considering when this information or these concerns will be best received. Think about the person who's having the conversation. What will you or that person say during the conversation? You know, write down some bullet points. Think about, you know, how you want to tell this person that you're concerned or that you care about them and that this is coming from a place of care and concern. How do you want to approach what you're going to say? Also offer to go with the person to the doctor. So it can be really scary to think about going to the doctor by yourself and receiving some news that you're really scared to face. Maybe offer to go with that person to the doctor, you know, be a form of support with them. And often we statements help as well. You know, we can go through this together. I will go with you. You're not alone. Let them know that you're there for them. If needed, have multiple conversations. So sometimes, you know, maybe the person just wants to brush you off and not face it at all, or maybe they get upset and don't want to talk to you, or maybe it takes some time for them to really hear you, and they need some time to think about it and then come back and have the conversation. So it might need to be multiple conversations. So think about how you could approach that in a way that that could help to support them really hearing you and creating an ongoing conversation. And then the last thing I want to highlight is reach out for support. You know, I said, you know, we statements and you're not alone. You as the person who's concerned about somebody don't need to be in this alone either. So don't hesitate to reach out for support. At the end of our conversation today, I will talk you through the Alzheimer's Association resources. More in depth, we do have support groups for people who are loved ones, spouses, or family members of people navigating a diagnosis. We do family care consultations for free with clinicians in our office. And we have all types of education programs like what we're doing today on a variety of common topics related to Alzheimer's and dementia and the conversations that take place and kind of how to navigate all of this and approach the communication and what to expect. So we have all different types of education programs and we're happy to help you with this as well. So on the next slide, I want to quickly highlight the emphasis on early detection and diagnosis, because I know this is something that's come up a few times during our conversation today. So this can have really impactful, helpful benefits around, you know, just emotionally, socially, and medically. So just having the conversation with a professional means that that person navigating a potential diagnosis or working on these symptoms can really understand the symptoms. They can explore treatment options, and there are a lot more treatment options available the earlier in those stages of Alzheimer's and dementia. It can help improve health outcomes. It can help prevent complications. It allows that person, while they're cognitively able to, be involved in legal and financial planning and making those decisions for themselves or as part of their family unit. It gives them access to care services. They can participate in clinical trials. We have a whole trial match program through the association. And it can also help them to manage the cost of care, because we know that cost is a big piece of this for people, and we want to make sure that they have access to different options and resources so they can find the thing that works for them. So again, we really, the big reason that we like to share out these early warning signs is that we can help connect people to that detection and diagnosis and make sure that they're connected to help that can be really beneficial for them. And on our final slide, again, I just wanted to quickly highlight the free Alzheimer's Association resources that we offer. Like I mentioned before, we serve so many counties in Greater Cincinnati through the Greater Cincinnati chapter. If you know someone who could use support and help who is outside of Greater Cincinnati, maybe they're even in a different state, the Alzheimer's Association is a national association. So they would just have a different chapter that they would be connecting with for similar or same programs and resources. So we do have a 24/7 helpline. I wanted to highlight that first because that is a national support system that is answered out of our home office in Chicago. They can answer questions in over 200 languages and also help connect you to local resources near you. So you can call that. We also know a lot of concerns and questions arise on weekends, during holidays, after hours when our offices are closed. So this would be a 24/7 option to make sure that you can get connected to some support and help as you're navigating this. I mentioned before we do support groups. So we have support groups for loved ones, spouses, family members, friends of people with Alzheimer's or dementia. So it's meant to be kind of that caregiver support group or, care partner support group. Those meet once a month and they're at various locations throughout greater Cincinnati. So we have a full listing that we can get to you through Kelly that shows you where those support groups take place that are closest to you. They tend to run an hour and a half to 2 hours in length and take place once a month, and they can be in person, some are on Zoom. It just depends on the location and who is facilitating that. Like I said before, we do free education programs. We have some online, like what we're doing today. We also do them throughout the community. I'm getting ready to finish up our September program, so those will be released later this week. We do offer social engagement programs for people who are in those early stages of Alzheimer's or dementia. Our social engagement programs are meant to be fun social outings that a caregiver and a person living with dementia can get out of the house and go do something fun and safe together. Oftentimes it'll be a sing-along or bingo or a different craft each month. So we do those throughout greater Cincinnati as well. And we do offer free family care consultations. So we have 2 licensed clinicians out of our Cincinnati office who, this number on the screen here, you can call to directly schedule that care consultation. They can help with care planning, referrals, all kinds of support and resource sharing. They'll work with you and, coordinate with any other family members that should be involved in that conversation. They can do them over the phone. They can do them in person at a public place. So you can call that number to schedule that. And then lastly, our Greater Cincinnati chapter, that phone number will connect you directly to our Cincinnati office. If you want to connect with me directly, I know Kelly shared out my direct contact information as well. Don't hesitate to reach out if something resonates or you have a question later on that doesn't come to you until you're driving home or you're in the shower or walking your dog. Just reach out anytime with questions. And the last thing I want to highlight, our community resource finder. If you're completely overwhelmed by the amount of programs and services I just shared with you, you can go to that communityresourcefinder.org website and you can just type in your zip code and it'll show you the education programs and the support groups and social engagement programs that are happening closest to you, and they'll list them out and give you links and information for registering. So that might be a really easy way to just kind of shoot you down the channel for finding some more resources. So with that, I feel like I've talked for a very long time. I want to make sure we have time for questions. So does anyone have questions about the information we covered today?
Awesome. Thank you, Kelsey.
Yeah.
We will go ahead and open up the Q&A portion of today's session. So if you have a question, go ahead and submit that using the questions feature in your attendee panel. But we did have some pre-submitted ones, so we can go ahead and start with those.
Great.
The first one asking, can Alzheimer's disease be prevented, or what ways can I keep my mind sharp?
Oh, that's great. That's such a good question. And I want to give a quick plug because we offer an education program on that. And so if you're looking for it, the program is called Healthy Living for Your Brain and Body. And we have it on our website and we do it out in the community at various locations each month. And what we really focus on are different categories of areas that you can kind of have control over that are linked to decreasing your risk. So we use the research we know around Alzheimer's disease and dementia and what we can do, those modifiable risk factors that I mentioned at the beginning of our talk. So I'll start with the top one because it has the most research tied to its positive effects. It is cardiovascular exercise. So that is going to be something that increases your heart rate maximum by, it increases your heart rate by 60 to 80% of its maximum. And it's something that you want to be doing at least 3 times a week for 30 to 60 minutes each time. So ideally, you're doing something that is really increasing your blood flow and getting your heart pumping, which is moving blood into your brain. So I think it's 95% of the brain, of the blood that your heart pumps each time it beats goes to your brain. So that is going to be your most impactful way to help reduce your risk. We also talk about diet and nutrition. If you want to look up something, it's called the MIND diet, is the recommended diet that is associated with reducing your risk. It's kind of a hybrid of the DASH diet, which is for hypertension, plus the Mediterranean diet. So you've probably heard of the Mediterranean diet. It's kind of a version of that. So I would say diet, exercise. We talk about sleep being really important and all the aspects of what can help you sleep. We talk about cognitive activity. We talk about social engagement. And then we also talk about stress management as being a part of that. So really, you want to be thinking about all of these areas because they help to best kind of maximize your benefits and best increase your risk of decreasing your risk of developing Alzheimer's or dementia. But I would say if you want to skip ahead and focus on one, it's definitely going to be your physical exercise. That's a great question.
Our next question is asking, is vascular dementia different than Alzheimer's?
Also a great question. So I just want to refer back to kind of the beginning, that umbrella of dementia. It is different than Alzheimer's. So vascular dementia, when we think about Alzheimer's disease and that umbrella of types of dementia, Alzheimer's disease makes up for 50 to 75% of dementia diagnoses. Vascular dementia makes up 20 to 30%. So I would say if you're thinking about the difference between the two, Alzheimer's disease is the most common form of dementia, the most common cause, and then vascular dementia is the second most common cause. So they can be similar. They can also both be present at the same time. So again, we were talking earlier about that mixed dementia being possible. But vascular dementia is really, it's about that hardening of the arteries, and it can really, it's most common in people who have had strokes, definitely mini strokes. And they are related, Alzheimer's and vascular dementia, because it's said to say that people with Alzheimer's show signs of mini strokes. So it's really showing in the research that there is presence of both of them taking place at the same time.
Thank you. And then our next question we have is, will a person experiencing early signs of Alzheimer's be able to recognize the warning signs in themselves?
Oh, that's a really good question. Yeah, I think it can be. It depends on the person, but it's definitely possible. And I will say too that I do know people who are in the early stages of Alzheimer's who talk really openly about their diagnosis and how they can kind of feel a change in the way that their memory is able to work or not work as well as it used to. So it's definitely possible. I would say what we are really striving to do is to get this information out into the community so that more people know, what are these warning signs? What might you see in yourself or somebody else that you care about? Because we want to catch it early. I'm sure you've heard that's one of the biggest things I've driven home today. So it's definitely possible that someone will see that in themselves. Someone will be able to notice, I have to use more visual aids to remember to turn the oven off. I am not able to, I tried to drive to the ice cream parlor down the street in my neighborhood and I forgot how to get home. And it can be really scary depending on the situation, especially when driving is involved. And so there can be that awareness. And sometimes that awareness can mean that that person is open to getting help and asking for help. But unfortunately, sometimes it can also mean that we see people struggling with denial and not wanting to face something that they don't want to have to think about. So I would say, yes, definitely someone can recognize that in themselves, but not always. So that's kind of what we're up against in trying to educate people and let them know what those warning signs are.
And I know we're coming up on our time, so this might be our last question, but it's asking, what is the testing process and when should someone consider being tested for Alzheimer's?
That is a really good question. So there are several different types of assessments that are out right now. There was just if you saw, there was like an international conference for the Alzheimers Association just last month. They're working on a blood test right now that's just like a finger pricking that would be part of kind of your general assessment or your general physical that you could get with your primary care physician each year. So that's kind of where kind of the top of treatment and research is right now, because that was just released. But they also do brain scans, so you can do imaging of the brain. There's also a cognitive assessment, so you could take kind of like a formal test with your doctor. So there are several different types of assessments that you can do between like an assessment, kind of more of a what you would think of school like written test. The blood test is probably the most recent development, and then also brain scans and imaging you can do with your doctor. What we're working on right now, and it's not completely final yet, is doing some collaboration with within our health systems department, where we can help those primary care physicians understand what an assessment for Alzheimer's and dementia can look like, so that people don't have to go to a neurologist or a neuropsychologist to get that assessment, because we know that there are fewer of them and the wait list can be longer than, you know, if you would just see your primary care physician. So we're really working to help also give the tools to our PCPs to make sure that people can get assessments more easily and get those, you know, diagnoses more easily as well.
All right, thank you, Kelsey. That is going to conclude our Q&A session for today. If any questions come up after today's webinar, Kelsey's contact information will be up on the screen for just another second or so if you'd like to reach out, or you can always reach out to us at events@gecreditunion.org, and we are happy to get you connected. I do have a couple closing comments. You will immediately see a survey upon exiting the webinar. So again, please fill that out on how you thought today went, as your feedback is very important to us. And then lastly, up on the screen, you'll see a list of our upcoming webinars. If any of these topics are of interest to you, you can visit our events page or capture the QR code with your smartphone on the screen. That'll take you there directly. There you'll be able to learn more and register for these events. And we are always adding more, so if these topics aren't of interest to you, definitely be sure to check back soon. But with that, that is going to conclude today's session. Thank you all so much for joining us, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.